Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Safe Travels podcast. My name is Joey. In this episode, we have a very special guest. His name is Scott Niedermayer. He is a 4-time Stanley Cup champion and is an all-time great in professional hockey. But Scott is also a passionate conservationist with a deep love for the outdoors. And in this episode, we talk all about his journey with nature, as well as his current role with the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. Scott, in hockey, you are the greatest winner of your generation. But in this podcast, I want to talk to you about all the things that you champion off the ice. So thanks so much for doing this.
No, glad to be here. I grew up in a small town in the mountains in British Columbia, southeast BC. So it's always been part of my life, being out in nature and sort of enjoying it, recreating in it. Obviously, hockey has been a big part of my life too. So I'm thankful for that experience, but always would go back in the summers back home and get out and about and hike and fish and do all sorts of stuff. So yeah, glad to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into a lot of those stories. And I just alluded to it. You're most well known for, obviously, your illustrious hockey career, a 4-time Stanley Cup champion. But nature has always been at the core of who you are, growing up in Cranbrook, BC, as you just alluded to. What was kind of that first core memory for you with your family and being outdoors and knowing that, you're a part of the ecosystem in this world and you want to be a part of it?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I really didn't even realize that it was sort of part of my life. It just was, right? That was how we grew up in Cranbrook as my hometown. We were outside often doing things, whether maybe in my dad's old GMC pickup truck going to get firewood for the winter, going fishing, going hiking. Grew up skiing in the winter as well as playing hockey. Even just below our house, below our neighborhood, there was a small little creek and we had some friends and we'd always be down there, whether it was, looking at insects and bugs or fishing and catching the little trout that are in the creek. Like it just was our life. So I never thought much about it. It was just kind of what we did, who we were. We enjoyed it and we were sort of in the middle of it. I think the first time I actually made sort of a conscious thought about it was when I went down to New Jersey to the East Coast after I'd been drafted and spent my first season down there playing hockey and just was, caught up in the hockey, enjoying it, loving it again, not thinking about much. And that spring when I got home, landed at the airport just outside of Cranbrook and just kind of looked around and I was like, wow. Like all of a sudden I saw it differently. This is unbelievable. Look at the mountains, look at the view, look at the air is just crystal clear. And I just had such a new perspective and definitely a bigger appreciation for how I grew up and where I grew up. And I think just from there, that just continued to grow as I got older and continued to spend time there in the summer, enjoy the things I continued to as a kid, whether it was hiking and getting into a little bit of mountain climbing, to some level. Not as much winter sports anymore, obviously pretty busy with hockey, but yeah, it just kind of was who I was. My parents, thankfully, got us out doing that kind of stuff. We had friends that did it. And just kind of continued to grow for my appreciation for it.
Did you grow up with your brother, Rob, who was also in the NHL? You two won a Stanley Cup together. But do you have any classic memories of skating on a pond surrounded by mountains in BC?
Absolutely. We were out there, again, with that same group of friends. There was lots of little lakes and ponds that we'd head out to on a winter day, shovel it off, get the snow off, and then play a little bit of pond hockey. And you're right, like probably at that point when I'm 10 years old, I was just looking at the puck, trying to score goals. But now when we go back occasionally and maybe skate on the same lake or same pond, I'm just looking all around, the Rocky Mountains are there and you're staring at them and, the different animals and the wildlife that are around or you see. You see things differently as you get older. But we were really fortunate sort of to have the opportunity and the upbringing we did, Rob, my brother and I, and with our friends, with our parents, in Cranbrook and just in that area. It's an amazing place. It's just north of the border. You got mountains to the west of us. Purcells and Selkirks are, beautiful mountains, the Rockies to the east. And it's an amazing place. So I was lucky to grow up there for sure.
Part of the reason we're talking to is because you're also part of the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, known as the Y2Y initiative. You're on the board there. And In an opinion piece you wrote a couple of years ago, you told this great story of the moment you realize nature's kind of in control of this planet. And it's a memory with your father and your brother on a boat, and you saw some grizzly bears. Can you share that story?
Yeah, I mean, we would often go hiking, backpacking up into the mountains to a lake, bring the fishing rods, spend a night or two up there with, again, that same group of friends and their dads. And we just had a blast, little young kid up there playing around. And the one day, we were up there at our campsite, and one of the dads or somebody looked across the lake, not a big lake, and you could see a grizzly with 2 cubs kind of just walking along the shore, just making their way towards where we were. So at first I didn't really think too much about it, just kind of like, yeah, that's really cool. And we're watching. And then as they kind of slowly got closer, and that one of the dads said, we had a little sort of inflatable dinghy to fish out of up at the lake. And he kind of said, you know what, they're continuing our way. I think it's time to hop in that boat and just kind of let them move through and get away. So yeah, there's a really neat thing to know you're a small part of something bigger. And, a grizzly bear obviously is a way to really hit that home, just with what they're capable of, obviously a little scary. So that was a pretty cool moment, just first to see them and just be impressed at watching them just kind of walk along the side of the lake, but to also understand the respect they need. And, obviously when we would go hiking, you make noise, and we had bear spray, and you're taking all the precautions, trying to, behave as you should to stay out of too much trouble up there. And there's something about that just makes life better, I think, to understand that we're all part of that. It was a cool experience. Yeah. One of the ones I definitely remember as a young kid, for sure.
When you see a grizzly bear in that type of setting, does it just make you feel alive? That there's things bigger and greater?
Well, you get a shot of adrenaline for sure when all of a sudden someone suggests that you're getting too close for us and it's time to get in the boat. But I think it does. I mean, it just, nature, when you learn and you see it and you just look around, it really amazes me, for sure. And I think most people, when they really stop to look or to appreciate and learn, how it all functions and how we're all part of it. It's actually kind of one of the ways I kind of describe it was, as an athlete, I always, or one of parts of what I was trying to do was perform as well as I could. So it's like, you got to eat right, you got to, train and get strong and all these things. And then, with nature, as I just, started to pay more attention and read and start to digest some things, it's kind of the planet's kind of the same. It's about how do we keep it healthy and keep it functioning at its best, which benefits us as a living organism on this planet. And so in some ways I was kind of thinking, well, it's the same thing. I'm just, I'm eager in trying to, do things the right way as an athlete and as a person on this planet, so that it's functioning, as best it can for all involved. So in some ways it's very similar to sort of having that interest in conservation and the planet, as it was for me trying to be as good a player as I could on the ice. So kind of crazy maybe to some people, but I don't know, kind of makes sense to me. So
yeah, I love that parallel. You just mentioned, as a conservationist, what are some of those core principles that are near and dear to your heart that you want to relay to people that's important out in the natural world, and maybe things that we could be more mindful of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, is just how connected we really are to all of it. In today's world, I think it's easy to, be in your air-conditioned house and turn on the tap so the water just we don't really, it's hard now to really feel we're part of it, I think, in how we live in our modern society. So you have to kind of make the effort, I think, to sort of experience it and pay attention to it. And it still obviously matters because, if there's not enough snow in the mountains, you have drought and on, and it affects farming, it affects animals. And as much as we think we're removed from it, we still are at its mercy. At the end of the day, we have technology and the ability to do a lot to help ourselves, but I think we're still at its mercy, and we're still, I think, well served by trying to let it do what it needs to do and function properly. I think we will benefit from that. But I've learned a lot, being involved in on a board. Before that, I was doing a little bit of sort of volunteer PR work for a small group called Wild Sight, which is sort of around Cranbrook in the East Kootenay. It's sort of their conservation group, which focuses on that area. I know people that are part of that organization and done great work locally around the East Kootenay. So I did a bit there. When I retired, I did a few little things for World Wildlife Fund as well out of Vancouver, and I've enjoyed every second of it. The people you meet, the things I've learned, it's great. I love it. And now being part of Yellowstone to Yukon, Y to Y Conservation Initiative on the board there, and just meeting all the people that work there. Amazing people, smart people, passionate people, great people. People that just care about each other, care about the planet, and they're out there doing everything they can to try and keep it as best as possible for our kids, and on and on, because it kind of seems like the right thing to do in a sense. I love it. Maybe everybody isn't going to love it, but I'm sure some kid down the road's would love the opportunity, like you brought up about seeing a grizzly bear on the edge of a lake and kind of getting put in your place a little bit, and just realizing this world is an amazing place.
When you were playing in the NHL, you had a long career. Did you ever find it hard to balance your core principles of being a conservationist while also being wrapped up into the hockey season? Were you able to find a balance between getting to, fight for the things you really care about in the world versus, being a professional athlete?
Yeah, I think when I was playing, I wasn't as involved as I am now. Like I said, I still, in the summers or, when the opportunities were there to get out and do something, go for a hike and that, I would. But, as a hockey player, I stayed fairly focused on that as a job, and that was sort of a bit of a conscious decision. I felt that was sort of the right thing to do. That was my priority at the time. But then still trying to learn, read, pay attention to things. And I think since I've been retired, I've spent more time and more effort in that area and sort of volunteered a little bit more. But was always learning, always curious, about sort of, learning, and then really like, what are the little things that I can do? There's more. I hate to preach, but I as soon as you start preaching, you're thinking, well, there's more I should be doing too, to sort of make the right decisions in how we live. And there's a lot now, right? There's a lot that has impact on the world, and that's not the easiest thing in the world, to sort of make those decisions and still live in sort of modern society. So there's always a bit of a tussle there, a bit of a wrestle, but trying to work through that and figure it out.
You just mentioned that you feel like you're not doing enough to protect the things you want to protect. What have you implemented into your life that you feel is making a difference on the environment?
Yeah, I mean, again, I hate to kind of get into that discussion a little bit, just because it's never enough really in some aspects. But, I've been, early when I came here, I bought myself a Prius. The guys love making fun of me for driving that around. But, I've had electric cars for a while, gone with solar panels. You start to understand, the use of water, and maybe putting plants in your yard that don't take as much water, and nothing earth-shattering by any means, but just trying to be aware of the little things. I'm a big Patagonia clothing fan, so they do a lot of great work in sort of organic, both growing cotton and different things for their clothes, and their focus on sort of conservation and that type of thing, and what they do as a company, and that really speaks to me. So you chip away, you try and do a little more, and you do one thing and then move on and try and do the next, and hopefully we will figure all these things out before I don't know when too late is, but and it feels good to try and make a difference, for sure.
Do you have any friends or family that you've taken out into beautiful places for the first time and seen them personally have the aha moment in terms of how you live your life and what you champion in the world, and you bring them into that world and they get it?
Yeah, I don't know, that may be a little far in the sense that they get it, but there's no question, when people maybe come up to Cranbrook or different places, and they get to see it with their own eyes, it's pretty powerful, for sure, whether it's just the scenery and the mountains and water that they see, or maybe crossing paths with an animal. My brother lives on a 500-acre ranch back home, and there'll be nights where there's 100, 200 elk out in his field, and you're just watching them. He's had grizzly bears come right down to his house, and so to see that when you haven't seen that type of stuff before is is profound and a great experience, and I think can be sort of a little trigger that says, you know what, yeah, look at this, is amazing. And then, what do you do about it from there is a neat thing. So yeah, I don't know about aha. I don't know if I've had an aha moment. You continue to kind of learn and try and improve in what I can do personally. And I'm sure everybody's kind of similar in their lives, I guess.
And going back to that opinion piece that I had talked about earlier, about the primary purpose of it was to talk about old growth forests in British Columbia.
Yeah.
What can you share about old growth forests, the experience that you've had, their importance to us on this world?
Yeah.
This world.
Yeah. I've learned a bit about it, and logging, forestry has been a huge business in British Columbia. There's no question. A lot of the people, a lot of friends that haven't really had family in the business, but it's a big business there, and it provides for a lot of families. At the same time, it comes with a cost, and there is something very hard to describe, especially me. I'm not by no means a poet or anything like that, but when you are walking amongst these big old trees, and you just kind of slow down to realize these things have been here for hundreds, if not more, years. And you just feel their presence of how big they are. I mean, when we lived down here, we've been up to the sequoias and the redwoods, and in BC on the coast, big cedar trees and different things that you see. It's a really cool thing just to walk around in them, and then you start to learn, the things that they provide for wildlife. The habitats and the different things that they do. It just makes sense, I guess. You have this feeling, you kind of feel like this is something special. Don't really know why, but then when you start to learn from people that know and study and understand the importance of old growth forests and what they do for our planet, it just kind of hits home, and it's like, yeah, these things are amazing. I mean, just in awe, when you look and see, when we went up to the sequoia trees and you just look at the mass and see how big that is, it's hard just not to sit there in awe, like I said, and it blows your mind. So, we've logged a lot of trees in BC. We've built a lot of houses all over the world, North America. So it seems to me we should do our best to protect what we have left in the old growth, especially in BC or anywhere for that matter. There's not a lot, around the world, I'm sure. So I'm sure we can find ways to get lumber and build maybe without cutting those trees down, and keeping them around to help us and the planet be healthy.
I love that, and I couldn't agree more. I spent some time at the redwoods a couple of months ago, and to stand up against a redwood and look up into the canopy and know that there's endemic species that only survive in the canopy of a redwood tree, like the salamander that's in the area, it's humbling in a way, and it makes you feel pretty small on this planet, knowing that there's thousands of ecosystems all around us that we're not even privy to or think about on a day-to-day basis. I
think that, I don't know, feeling small and insignificant, it seems like it would be a bad thing, but it feels good.
It does.
To be part of something so grand and amazing, and understand that, we do have impact, but just to look around and there's so much more going on, to be part of that is a neat feeling. And, I don't know, I think that's what just being in nature does, you get out, go for a walk, and you just get up on top of a ridge or a mountain, and around our home, you look and you just see the mountains, just kind of, it's a sea of mountains in the back, and you're just like, wow, it just feels great to be up there. So, I would agree with you 100%.
In addition to being a conservationist, you like to recreate in the parks and enjoy them, and I'm sure that gives you a really unique perspective on your goals and initiatives and trying to protect these places. But what have your experiences been like enjoying the national parks, both in the US and in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, they're all obviously very special and great to see. Like I said, we've been, up into, sequoias and Yosemite, up to the redwoods in California, Death Valley actually, which I thought was a really cool place to see and spend a few days out there. And then often in the summer we would drive back home and up to British Columbia. So there's lots of interesting ways you can get up, whether it's along the coast or go inland a bit and, get into the parks in Utah. Probably stopped at most of those, Arches and Zion and Bryce Canyon, and been through them, which are sort of another world in a way, really cool to see. climbed Grand Teton a number of years ago with a friend from here, and sort of a fundraising kind of event that we did, which was really cool. Jackson's an amazing place. Glacier National Park is just south of us in Montana. So been there a number of times as well. So yeah, I love to sort of explore. I think that's a neat part of recreating outside, is the opportunities to do it in so many different places, and the parks are a great place to do that. Up in Canada, obviously Banff and Jasper and Kootenay National Park are just north of us, and lots of little provincial parks as well. So spent probably most time in those parks. And around Cranbrook, a lot of the times we're just hiking out in, public lands and just up in the mountains, driving on, logging roads that have been put there to log, but then take advantage of it to get up and be able to hike and get out and into the hills around my hometown.
Going back to Redwood National Park, you just mentioned it, we talked a little bit about it, but Redwood National Park is a really unique story of old growth that was chopped down, aerial seeded. Now they have this monoculture of trees that largely aren't redwood trees. And there's such a finite amount of redwoods left, but you just mentioned logging roads. There's in the process of removing these logging roads, removing sediments from the rivers and restoring this beautiful place of redwood trees. When you see a story like that, what does that make you feel like?
Yeah, I mean, it's great, right? Like, we're taking sort of technology and our knowledge and we're learning and we're doing something about it, which is great, which is really, I guess, sort of what Y2Y is all about, is sort of, with technology and with science and work that's been done by so many people out and about studying animals and what can we do to really help the most, to make the planet healthy, animals, thrive in their natural environments, that type of thing. So it's great to see. I mean, it's good to see that we're making those conscious decisions to do it, because there is a lot of really interesting, smart people out studying this stuff and learning about it. So where Y2Y, a big part of what they're about, probably the foundation of what they're about, is sort of movement, and allowing animals to move from one area to another. A park is great, but it's sort of a finite place with boundaries, and animals for the most part don't live in one spot. They want to move. There's migrations, and they move to find different mating partners in the genetic pool, and on, way above my pay grade. But they for things to function well, they have to be able to move. And whether it's civilization and homes and us as humans and how we affect the landscape or roads and different things, they all have an impact on how different animals are able to move. And Y2Y is really kind of focused on that as one of their main things. They work with lots of different groups that are, right from Yellowstone in northern Wyoming all the way up to the Yukon in Canada, and try and provide solutions that can help everybody. A lot of what they talk about is not only are you helping animals by maybe preventing collisions and deaths on roads, but you're helping the people driving too, right? Less collisions, less damage to vehicles, less hurt people. That does happen. So I think if we're smart about it, there's often win-win sort of solutions to problems, and it is fun to be part of that or to see people working on that for sure.
You just alluded to a lot of what my next question was going to be, which is the Y2Y is a 2,100 mile corridor between the Yellowstone area in the United States and the Yukon in Canada. What are some of those learnings diving deeper into animal interactions with roads? And over the last couple of decades, these roads are being built in more remote places. What have people seen from the interactions between animals and roads?
Yeah, and I think with technology, like we were talking about earlier about GPS and just the ability to track, and I think that's really opened people's eyes to understand what these animals do. I think there's a story on Y2Y's website about Pluie, I believe is the name of this wolf, and they couldn't believe when they had it tracked at how far it moved, around. It was in Canada and it went down into Montana, into Idaho, and it was just all over the place, which was just an eye opener, I think, for people to be like, wow, look at what this one animal did. There's neat stories of different sightings of grizzly bears making their way into Idaho, which feels like somewhat of a success with what Y2Y has been focused on. You have populations in Glacier National Park in northern Montana, British Columbia, and Alberta obviously has a population of grizzly bears. Yellowstone does as well, but they're somewhat sort of separated by parts of Montana and the interstate and that sort of thing. But with some of the work they've done already, they're seeing grizzly bears in places maybe they haven't seen them in 20, 30, 40 years before. So that is obviously a pretty neat thing to know that that's actually is working. And if that work continues, that then you're going to see grizzlies sort of functioning in a bigger area, which will only help them, be healthier. And you got to obviously respect them when you're out and about and do the right things. But, knowing they're out there in the landscape is a very special thing, I think, for sure.
What's another species of animal that has been monitored by the Waidawai, or moose and caribou? Is that a part of tracking?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all of it. That's what's kind of special about that area of our continent, is just the amount of different animals that call it home. You have all the bears and elk and moose and deer and antelope in part of it. And one of the ones that we've talked about and is another amazing animal is a wolverine. And I didn't know a whole lot about them. You hear that these little sort of, I think they're kind of badgers, but they're like one of the toughest animals I think that you can cross paths with, and you don't often see them. But I read a book a few years ago recommended from some of the Waidawai people. I think it's called The Wolverine Way. I think Chadwick is the author's last name. But these little animals, it was really neat in how they studied them, and the traps they built, and kind of the rudimentary ways in which they learned about the animals. But they just cover so much ground, and the amount of territory that they need to sort of function in their best way was fascinating. So it's another type animal that really needs big space. Grizzly bears need big space. Wolverines need big space to sort of be healthy and have populations that function well. And so those have been two of the ones that probably move the most along with wolves, I guess would be. But yeah, it's just, I love learning about it. I love just sitting there and listening to the biologists tell their stories about, adventures they've been on or things they've learned. And so yeah, I enjoy that part of it as much as any, for sure.
When I went to North Cascades, the rangers there all mentioned that their pinnacle moment in the park would be if they ever had the chance to see a wolverine, because they're so elusive and they live at such high altitude. They're fascinating. Yeah.
In this book, it tells stories of they had trackers on these wolverines, and like the places they went would absolutely blow. I mean, literally climbing mountains, like up and over mountains, and they're thinking to themselves, like, what is this thing doing? But like their capability to do that is unbelievable. So
when you see stories like the wolf being reintroduced to the Yellowstone area, has that been a story that you've been tracking and monitoring since the reintroduction of those animals?
Yeah, I mean, obviously wolves, grizzly bears, and interaction with humans and what we do as farming and different things does cause, issues. And, I think that is one of the things Waidawai recognizes and does try to provide some answers, for people, for ranchers or people that, are sort of doing things out there. And, wolves may, take a few of their cattle or whatever. A grizzly may do the same thing. So that is a focus, and I think Waidawai is definitely aware of that and appreciates the concerns that do come from people making a living and providing for not only themselves but all of us, essentially, and just trying to, again, find answers, find solutions that can work for everybody, work for the wildlife, and then allow the ranchers and whatnot to do and continue their way of life as well in the most successful way for both sides. And not easy, for sure. And but I think when we can get the planet nature sort of into its most natural state, from my limited expertise, that seems to be ideal, right? When because I don't think when we're making decisions and kind of manipulating things, it usually ends up too well. So
yeah, and drawing off of that and to nature being in its most natural state, relating to this in a very relevant area, the bear 399, a very famous bear at Grand Teton, Yellowstone, was very habituated to humans. It was very intelligent, had interactions with human beings. probably one of the most famous bears in the world, definitely the most famous bear in the United States, unfortunately was run over a couple of months ago. I think at 28 years old. She was...
I think I did read that.
Yeah, she incredible bear who had cubs with her at the time, and she had many cubs in that region. Very impactful, but this speaks to the work that yourself and Y2Y are trying to create of not habituating these bears and getting them so familiar with roads and get too comfortable on a road to the point where they could be struck like that.
Yeah. No, that's unfortunately an example of things that do happen, right? And it's all of what you mentioned. I mean, there's a lot we can do to sort of not attract bears to places maybe where there is going to be confrontation. And, in today's world, that usually doesn't end too well for them. It may seem innocent at the time, or leaving a little bit of food out or leave some apples on the ground from the tree, and it attracts bears in, and you're thinking, you're helping out, but you're right. It kind of makes them comfortable in that environment, and usually there's a lot of trouble for them to find in that environment. So yeah, unfortunately, roads and vehicles are a big part of our society. It's how we get around. Maybe not unfortunately, they allow us to do a lot of things, but they come with a cost, and especially to wildlife. And if we can continue to try and find answers to eliminate, or not eliminating, but lessening those issues, I think better off for all of us, for sure.
Obviously, in certain areas of the world, in parks or other areas, you might not be able to get a wild place back to its natural state. Are there measures that we as a society can take with roads, with building underpasses underneath roads to help wildlife or animal crossing? Have we seen those types of maneuvers work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of Y2Y's focus, is sort of dealing with roads and how do you do that? And a lot of things you mentioned are parts of the answer. Up in Banff National Park, I'm not sure if they were the first, but they were one of the first overpasses that were ever built for wildlife. They would fence the side of the roads, build a big overpass, make it sort of as natural as possible, and sort of allow wildlife to move over it's not an interstate up in Canada, but it's our main highway that goes through Banff National Park. They've been there for quite a while, I 25 years maybe, or even more than that potentially. So there's been a lot of study on them, and evaluating how many animals use them and when and who and all those things. So I think what we do have now is some knowledge about how effective they are placed in the right spot, and how can we make them actually more usable by animals, more likely to be used. So a lot has been learned, and it is something that we've focused a lot on. Underpasses for some animals. It's funny, some animals would rather go under, some want to go over. I mean, they all sort of have different sort of things that appeal to them or allow them to feel comfortable to use. So I think we're at a point now where we do have some knowledge of that, and that is a big focus of Y2Y, is sort of managing that. They're continuing to work. There's a highway in southern BC, Highway 3, which is getting some attention now, and that's kind of closer to where I grew up. Kind of goes right through Cranbrook. Like I mentioned, I-90 is a big one in northern Montana that they're trying to find some answers to, and kind of get to a point where animals do have ways over it, whether north to south, south to north, so that they can move and, interact with other animals in different places. So, it's an interesting thing. I think the overpasses have been successful. They obviously do cost a few dollars, but there is savings as well, insurance and, collisions and damage done that way too. So it's an interesting thing, and hopefully I think the effort will continue, and I think we're on the right path.
I think nature and conservation is a tough conversation for a lot of people, just because we're always told we have such a finite amount of time on this planet. And the reality is our planet, for at least you and I's time here, is likely going to be okay, and it's worsening. And so we can oftentimes feel insignificant, like we alluded to earlier, and we live our own life. Why should we care about the planet 100, 200 years down the line? What's your response to that? Why should we care?
Well, I guess to me, it's as simple as I love it, so I'd love someone else to enjoy that same thing. I don't know. It just sort of seems, and then, I don't know where I think it's sort of an indigenous kind of wisdom that came from, I can't unfortunately know exactly where, but they talk about 7 generations when you make a decision. Like you should be thinking that far down the line. How does it affect them? And that really seems valuable, because, I would want someone to do that for me. I mean, it's sort of the golden rule in some ways where it's like, treat others as you'd like to be treated. And I'm thinking, well, I like being outside. I like being able to see grizzly bears. So I want the next person to be able to do the same thing and the person after that. And I don't know where that comes from. It's just kind of a feeling I have that it seems like the right thing to do. I guess maybe the amazement, the awe that it brings to me in my life. I enjoy it so much that I'd want others to sort of feel the same thing. So that's kind of where it comes from. I know that maybe there are sacrifices, and we do need to an economy needs to function, and we do need to survive, as a human being. I get that. And obviously that's where the debate comes into oftentimes, if not all the time. And I think I do try and respect that as well.
I love that answer. And it's perfect because I did want to talk to you about indigenous tribes. Y2Y states that there's a number of ancestral territories that the region covers. Mm-hmm. Does Y2Y interact with indigenous tribes across that region to better understand the landscape and make decisions? Yeah.
And I think what is really amazing is, we're talking about the technology and the information, the things that we've learned, but, the knowledge that they have that have been passed down for so long, thousands of years, they know a lot of things that maybe aren't done scientifically or aren't done, in our modern way or whatever, but they're valuable, and there's things to understand and to learn and to think about. And that is something Y2Y does try to sort of incorporate in what we do and what we recommend and how we learn and how we understand the world. And, because that really, indigenous people, hundreds of years ago, that they lived in such unison and sync with the natural world. They had to. That was, without it, they wouldn't have survived as long as they did. And, it's just amazing for them to hear the stories and how they understood it. And, like when I was doing some things with World Wildlife Fund, we were out on the coast of BC in a place called the Great Bear Rainforest. And you just start learning about the salmon and how so many people relied on salmon, at certain times a year to sort of provide for them. And, what it meant to them and how much they respected the salmon coming back and spawning and, giving their lives is, really how it works, right? They're born in the river, out to the ocean, they get bigger, they grow, they come back into the river, and they spawn again. So the next generation goes out and they die. I mean, that to wrap your head around that is I know they're just fish. They're probably not thinking like we are, but it's like, wow, like that's just such a powerful drive and such a powerful thing to, and there was such a cycle of life that so many indigenous people relied on that. Without that, probably couldn't have survived in places that they were. And you just hear those stories, and the appreciation and understanding that they had for that is a way to learn, for sure.
Absolutely. And we are still learning from indigenous cultures, and not only learning, but investing. I think about prescribed burns all the time. Mm-hmm. That's something that ancestral tribes have been doing forever. And now it's something that we're still welcoming into some parts of the United States and learning that it has mass benefits. Yeah. I love the story about the salmon, by the way. Even if they aren't thinking like you said, it proves that this world is so connected. Yeah. And every insect, every species in the world has a purpose here. And I almost feel like it's our responsibility to look deeper and understand what that purpose is.
Yeah. Yeah, that trip was amazing. It was kind of in the fall, and it was that time of year when the salmon were coming into the river. And I remember going into this little inlet where not even a river, it was a small or big creek kind of coming into the ocean. And we're pulling in, I'm looking around, and there's just dead fish floating everywhere. And it just kind of shocked me. It's like, geez, it's crazy. And then we get up actually into the river, and we're kind of walked up the river, and we're kind of, there's just piles of fish on the side of the river, and you're just thinking, doesn't feel right. But then, the biologists start talking about it, and they're like, the wolves and the birds and the bears come and eat, and, it feeds them, and they get fat, at this time of year, and it's such an important part for them as well. And then something that kind of blew my mind is like they'll drag it up into the forest a little ways, and it kind of decomposes into the ground, and you can actually do, you take a sliver of a big cedar tree that's growing there, and you'll actually find like some parts of that salmon, like the DNA is kind of the proteins or whatever have kind of gone up into the tree. Wow. And it's all, again, just like, I think it's safe to say we're all connected. It's all connected one way or another. How and why, probably don't know a lot about that, but to hear that was amazing. And it was a really neat thing to see and to learn about how sort of that cycle and how it just so many things were connected with the fish, with the salmon.
Absolutely. And, another recent story that's kind of to that point is Olympic National Park had the Elwha River restoration, removing a dam in the Elwha. Yeah. And when the dam was there, they were not getting any salmon or fish. As soon as that dam was removed, without any more human intervention of putting salmon back in, they just automatically started spawning back in that area.
Such a powerful drive they have to do that. Yeah. I mean, you do hear that is happening, and what a great thing. Again, you talked earlier about, restoring parts of the redwood forest or whatever. And, this is a great thing too. If there's dams and rivers that we can kind of restore back to a natural state, if we can find other better ways to make power or to do things, it really seems like a great thing we can do. I think in Northern California, is it the Klamath River or something? I think maybe there's some dams that have come out of there too. And that's exciting. It's just really neat to see and allow nature, the salmon to just do what they want to do. It's cool.
Yeah. And touching back on indigenous and ancestral tribes too, it's the connections that they have to the land. For people that are exploring a park or exploring an area that's deep in the wilderness, like, would you encourage them to do their research on the ancestral tribes that have lived there and invest in educating or meeting with them and learning from them? I just feel like it adds so much context to these places.
Yeah, no, it really does. I mean, thousands of years of knowledge and rhythm and, living and surviving, and at times a harsh climate, without all the, without heaters and without all sorts of modern conveniences, right? And they really had to be in tune, whether it was buffalo moving or how the salmon came in the different seasons and the berries and on and on. Like, I was out hiking with a gentleman, Harvey Locke, who was one of the founders actually of Y2Y. And I was just amazed that, like, we're walking through the forest and he's like, yeah, here, try this berry and you can eat this root, and we're going on and on. I'm like, well, it all looks the same to me, but it was just really neat, for his level of understanding of that. And I was just kind of like, wow, this is amazing, just, you really could live out here. And if you knew what you were looking at and what was edible and whatnot, so it was kind of a neat thing too. But yeah, I mean, just for sure, I think learning and listening is such a valuable thing, and their knowledge of the natural world, I think, is amazing.
I know a while back you and I chatted about a trip you had to Mount Rainier, a mountaineering trip. What was that experience like? When did you get into mountaineering?
Yeah, so like I said, growing up, we kind of always went hiking, and our parents weren't really into it, but, as a young guy, you kind of look up and you're like, it'd be kind of neat to stand on top of that. So we kind of just got into hiking and scrambling and just kind of getting up on the top of things. And I don't know, we just kind of got more interested in it and think, that'd be kind of a neat mountain to try and climb. So we would take a few-day course on like glacier travel and how do you use ropes and self-rescue if you need to, if you fall in a crevasse and all these things that, and then maybe took a course on rock climbing and how do you put in protection and rope handling and all those things. And I'm by no means an expert at any of this. This was a long time ago and I've probably forgotten all of it, but at that point, the same group of friends I grew up with, we decided, Rainier's the tallest mountain around. Let's see if we can go climb it. So after we had taken these courses, we drove down to Washington and climbed Rainier, which was cool. We were pretty excited as some young guys to do that. And it's a neat mountain, big volcano, sort of sticking out of almost the middle of nowhere down east of Seattle there. But and since we've climbed some different mountains and scrambled up, and now I enjoy actually taking my kids up and climbing and hiking some of the mountains around Cranbrook and places I've been and introducing them to the same thing. So it's a kind of a cool thing to share with them.
We haven't talked a lot of hockey, but I have to bring this up because you just mentioned looking up at a tall peak and wanting to be there. You have, in my opinion, the most iconic hockey photo of all time. You holding the Stanley Cup above your head at a mountain peak. Can you describe that moment and what took place to get up there?
Yeah. So that was Fisher Peak, which is sort of the tallest point from Cranbrook that you can see when you're sitting in town and you look around, you see the mountains all around you. Fisher Peak is the tall one that kind of sticks out, and I don't know, why, but you just want to feel the need to kind of climb it. And then, yeah, when you win the Stanley Cup, I don't know, for the last 30 years, they've kind of given every player a day to take it home or take it where you would like and kind of have a party and share it with friends and pictures and do the rest of it. And the first time I won it in 95, had it home in Cranbrook, and you know, you're doing this, you're taking it here, taking pictures and doing all this stuff. And then I don't know, I don't even know if it's my idea, a friend's idea, but someone's like, yeah, it'd be cool to get a picture on top of a mountain. Obviously winning the Stanley Cup is sort of the top of the NHL, you know? And it just seemed like a fitting connection to be on the top of a peak holding the Stanley Cup. So, fortunately, I did get another crack at winning it. And I have one of my friends who we grew up with and do a lot of hiking with is a photographer. And then there was another guy too in town that we knew was a photographer, and they kind of got talking, I think even before we knew when the Stanley Cup was coming, and they talked to the local helicopter pilot and they said, you know what, we talked about this before. Is this something we can maybe do, is get the Stanley Cup up to the top of Fisher Peak and get some pictures? So they had kind of had it already organized a little bit. And so we went for it. We flew up to the top in the helicopter. It was pretty intense getting off. This wasn't very big. We didn't land on the top, so we hovered about 3 feet out. I kind of scurried down, hopped out onto the top of Fisher Peak. My buddy, the photographer, handed me the Stanley Cup, which was a little risky, but it worked. And then he hopped out. The other guy flew around in the helicopter taking pictures while my friend was on the top with me taking pictures. And yeah, it turned out really cool. Just stand there, lift the Stanley Cup. Like I talked about earlier, you got the mountains in the background, just like a sea of peaks, and a special place for me. Fisher Peak, close to my home in Cranbrook there. Have climbed it a number of times, taken my kids up there now. So yeah, it means a lot to me. I think people like it. It's a scenic picture. It's a cool picture. But just, yeah, it's home to me. It's a place I love, and to kind of have the Stanley Cup and all that combined was cool. And yeah, I'm glad it worked out for sure.
Oh, it worked out. That photo is amazing.
Yeah, it didn't have any big plans to sort of, but yeah, I love sharing it too. Like, people appreciate it, and it's kind of neat to see. So that wasn't the goal by any means. It was kind of a personal thing, but yeah, it's a cool thing.
You are an extraordinarily humble person who has accomplished a whole lot in your life. Do you think a lot of that humbleness and knowing who you are, you've stated that several times, you've always known who you are and where you came from. Do you think a lot of that came from your upbringing, being in nature and understanding your place really in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know about the last bit, understanding my place, because I still am learning, but I think growing up, just in an environment with like-minded families and friends, and my parents taking us out, and that being a real part of our upbringing, I think was a positive. I think the fact I've been able to stay connected with those friends, still continue to go back home, and I think that was a real positive and fortunate thing for me, that I was able to do that as well. I think that's helped a lot. I know every time after the season, like I mentioned, going back there in the summer, it was a great way to sort of unwind and just kind of relax and, stay in shape, hiking and doing things still, but just being out in, the mountains and the lakes. And it just really was a great way to sort of spend time and relax from the intensity and the grind of a hockey season. So I think it definitely has helped me, and is part of who I am, for sure. I grew up there. I learned those lessons. I got to experience, seeing the wildlife, and maybe not understanding it, but at least being in awe of it, being in it, and kind of being aware of it, for sure. So I think that's fair.
Your wife, Lisa, has been a big part of your life in many areas, and you met her when you were very young. And how has she adapted your life in terms of nature? Is she outdoorsy like you? Are your kids into it? Do you guys kind of challenge each other on thoughts about the outdoors and the natural world?
Yeah, I mean, she grew up in Cranbrook too. We're both from the same place, so you were surrounded by it, whether you were out in it or not. One of the great things about Lisa is she's a gamer. So if I say I'd love to go skiing, or I'd love to do this, she never says anything. So let's go. So, that I'm pretty fortunate that way, that she's a gamer and just willing to try anything and do anything. And we have tried to get our kids the same experiences that we had growing up, whether it's out hiking or camping, backpacking, skiing and getting outside in the winter as well. We've tried to give them those experiences too, and they seem to sort of be taking to it. Actually, the same friends that I grew up with, their kids are about the same age. And last year we went for a hike with all of us, and I think there was about 30 of us that went up and spent 2 nights just up in the mountains above our town. And my brother was there with his kids and some of our other friends, and it was a real cool thing. And now they're talking about wanting, Dad, can I borrow the tent and the backpacks? We're going to go by ourselves. So, I don't know. That's a big moment. We'll let them go by themselves, but I think obviously at some point you do, and it's kind of neat that they have that interest to get out and continue to experience those things for sure.
I was gonna say, does that make you happy when they ask you those questions?
Yeah. I love it, and I like to see that they found a connection to it and want to do it as well for sure.
I think a couple of years ago you also had an experience in Africa, right? What was that like?
Yeah, it was our 25th wedding anniversary, and in typical Lisa fashion, it wasn't going to be a trip with just me and her. It was going to be our whole family. And so we brought the 4 boys and went to Africa for sort of a safari and kind of looked around there. And yeah, it was amazing too. I mean, pictures don't do nature justice. I mean, as great as a picture can be, it never does anything justice. I remember seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, and you see so many pictures of it and you're like, that looks really cool. And then you stand on the edge of it and you're just blown away. Like it's just, that's how it works. Pictures just never tell the whole story. But it was amazing. I mean, to see all the, elephants and, cheetahs and lions and giraffes, and you're out in the middle of it and you're seeing it. And it really was another very similar experience in that sense of being outside and just really being in awe of what it's like. And it was a great trip. We all loved it. A different part of the world, which kind of is always fun to see, the different animals. So yeah, it was a highlight for us for sure to be able to do that.
Touching on the Grand Canyon, is it tough for you too when you're standing in a place like that and hearing all the stories of, the top layer is this 100 million years old, and the bottom layer is billions of years old? Is that hard for you to comprehend?
It doesn't I can't figure that out. Yeah, I mean, how can any of us really comprehend that, right? But I think it goes to, when you really slow down and pay attention and you recognize what we're part of. I think that's just part of that, right? Like the age and the time it takes for things to happen and all those things. So it really is, I guess, what draws me to learning more about it. And it is hard to wrap your head, it's hard to wrap your head about 30 years as opposed to 30,000 years. I mean, but yeah, and the fact that it's taken that long for it to sort of be what it is today is amazing, obviously.
What are you currently in the process of learning about? I know you mentioned right before we turn on the cameras that you're currently reading a book and studying things, and I know you're a very studious person. So what's captured your attention recently?
I wouldn't use the word studying. That may be a little too much credit for what I do. I do find books interesting and learning, but definitely wouldn't say it's that in depth. But a gentleman, I think Goldfarb is his name, wrote a book called Crossings, which is what I'm reading right now, and very much about sort of why is a big part of the book, but other things. He goes back and talks about when automobiles first invented and how it affected everything, and which a good author is, able to weave a really interesting tale by telling, facts that maybe told by somebody like me would put you to sleep. But, so it's interesting. I mentioned the gentleman, Chadwick, that wrote the book, Wolverine Way, which I really enjoyed. He wrote another one recently. I think it's called 4/5 a Grizzly, which is a reference. I think we share 80% of our DNA with a grizzly bear. And he just talks about the connections in nature, which we've talked about in this thing. And that book really kind of just solidified sort of things I was starting to learn and understand about how we are connected and everything matters. And that book really spoke a lot to that. So, I'm by no means doing research. I'm by no means studying. I'm not but I do like to read a good story and learn some things along the way for sure. So.
Is the ecology of these natural places the thing you like hearing most about?
Yeah, but I think there's lots of stories that can be told, about people that have been there, whether it's the indigenous people that have been there thousands of years, or people that moved through that area at different times, maybe, chasing the gold rush or whatever it was at different times, how they lived and survived, and trying to imagine what that would be like, from our modern world, like I brought up a few times, but you drive up in your truck with air conditioning and you got all your food, like it's just a different, it would be such a different thing, charging off into the mountains. You don't know where you're going and you think you're going to find some gold and make a few dollars. Like it's hard to fathom what that experience would be like, and that I do like hearing all those things for sure.
You inspire me a lot because you're an example of a person who's reached the pinnacle multiple times. You're Captain Canada and won the Olympic gold medal for Canada. I know you hate hearing this, but
yeah, thanks for telling me.
But
no, it feels good. Obviously,
you've accomplished so much, but yet you're still so grounded to what you feel is important in your life, and what you feel is important is the natural world and giving a voice to animals and trees, things that don't have a voice to advocate for themselves. And I think that's inspiring for obviously myself, but everyone listening and watching, because you're an example of somebody who can live this life pursuing, their goals of hockey or whatever they're doing in their day-to-day life, but also have these aspirations for caring for our planet. And you're an example of someone who's balanced that so well. And
well, I'm not sure about that, but you know what? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't feel I'm making a sort of a conscious decision. I feel like I just have kind of ended up in that place. And, I think it is a good thing for all of us to sort of have some awareness and trying to do our part. Some people maybe can do more than others. I think one of the things being involved in these different organizations and kind of reading and learning is just there are a lot of amazing people, smart people with big hearts that care about others, care about people, care about the planet, that are out there working hard and doing a lot of things to educate us and to solve problems. And obviously, the news and social media these days, people are really good at sort of getting us riled up and, getting headlines and things that sort of grab our attention. A lot of times that's negative, unfortunately, but there is a lot of good things happening, a lot of people that come from a good place trying to do good things. And that feels good too, just to witness that and to get to know people like that. I don't know if I qualify as one of those people, but definitely have crossed paths with a ton of those people, whether it's at Y2Y or other places, or just in everyday life when you sit down and talk about things, and people are aware and want to do the right thing for the most part, for sure.
Well, regardless how you feel about your impact on it, you're having conversations and you're bringing a voice to it, which, in turn, all we can hope for is advocacy on people who are listening to these types of conversations. So it's important to have.
And I think I recognize that would be my strength at this point. I was a hockey player that, especially in Canada, has some notoriety and can draw some attention at times to things. And that's something I'm happy to take advantage of to help, do good work in whatever it may be. So that's, I recognize that. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. I'm just a, older looking face that people can Google and think, oh yeah, that guy used to play hockey. So I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, but you are a conservationist, and I know that is a title you proudly have.
Yeah.
Regardless of the hockey accolades, I know conservationist is at the top of the list of things you're proud of in your life.
Absolutely. I think it's important. I've things I've learned have only reinforced that. The way I grew up, is special to me, and I think it would be to almost anybody that got to experience it.
Well, as we start to wrap this conversation up, I am curious, do you have a favorite national park or little area of the world that you find peace at and think about often? Yeah, just it would probably be home around Cranbrook. There's a number of hikes and little lakes that I think I mentioned earlier. Like, there's a place that we would hike up almost every year, and go fishing, and we'd catch a bunch of little cutthroat trout and just keep catching them and have competitions and, that type of thing. And I've taken my kids up to that place as well. And so, I think I'm no different than anybody. Home, for the most part, usually just a special connection to it. But I do love to explore, see different places. Mentioned Utah, like, just so different than BC, right? We got,
trees and vegetation and different color mountains and rocks there. And then you go down to Utah and that red rock just kind of stands out. Obviously, it's pretty much all there is essentially, but in its different shapes and forms that it takes. So it's kind of a neat contrast. The Grand Canyon in a very similar way, just very different landscape. Than I haven't been up into the Yukon before. Maybe when I was a kid, my parents actually used to live right on the BC Yukon border for a couple of years, but I was pretty young. I remember nothing, but I haven't really been up there, which I'd love to go up further north and kind of experience that. So maybe that's the next thing that I'll try and do at some point is get up and see the northern part of Y, the Yukon, the other end of it, the other Y. So that will be a goal maybe in the next couple of years to try and do that.
You mentioned Death Valley earlier too.
Yeah.
That park is so underrated, I think. It is, you get a little bit of everything, and it's it is a really cool place. Yeah,
like it's just the contrast, right? Like the lowest, the hottest, short drive away, which I did actually after I retired, was hike Mount Whitney. And I think somebody has a race where you go from the low part all the way to the top or whatever, which is crazy, but like just a really neat place on that east side of the Sierras. And then you got Death Valley there and just what it is about. Like, there's just a lot of cool places on the planet, in North America. Out west here, we're fortunate for sure, in Western US and Canada, it's a special place for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do want to give you the floor for any final thoughts on this conversation or encouragement for folks to, even if they're just hearing this conversation because they love Scott Niedermayer, the hockey player.
You think someone's going to Google it and come up with, look at this guy, where's he on a podcast? So yeah, they probably will, right? That's how the world works.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts for that person or somebody who is a conservationist that is looking for, extra encouragement onto caring for our planet? What would you say to them to get somebody curious and get them out and exploring?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever actually been asked that before. Am I in a spot to say anything? I don't know. But I don't know. I think get out, I think probably is like, go places, see what they're like, go out in them, try and experience them. I think that's probably the best way to really feel it and maybe get hooked by it and feel the importance of it for sure. I think educate yourself is always important in so many things. There obviously is a lot of things to learn about these days and there's only so much time, but if you can squeeze a little bit in and, maybe you are making a trip and, maybe you pick one thing and you read a few things on it because it really does make it even more special. I find when you go out on these trips and you just look and you're in awe of the landscape, that's one thing. But then, like we were talking about the salmon and just all the interconnection of the salmon and how they influence everything, it just kind of kicks it up another, times two again of what an amazing thing it is to be out in. So that I found that for me anyway to be important. And then I don't know, it's just really feels good and sort of optimistic of how many people are out trying to solve problems, and make this place, this world better for everybody, which I think ultimately is the goal. I mean, obviously people, I think it's Y, I can't remember exactly how they word it, but they want people and wildlife to thrive, right? They all of it, right? And I think that's our goal. And I guess I would sort of say, I think, we've chased stuff a lot as a society over the last probably 100 years. I know I've been part of it. I've chased stuff in my day, and I think there's better ways, more fulfilling ways to live a life and feel good about it and being part of nature and recognizing that, I think, is one of those ways for sure.
I completely agree. Well, Scott, thanks. This has been a really fun conversation. I'm thankful that you joined me in the van and we were able to have what I think is a really important conversation.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. It's something that I do love talking about. I've never done a lot of this yet, sort of talking about this, obviously comfortable talking about hockey, but love to be able to share this and some experiences. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. Scott is an incredible human being who has accomplished so much in his life, and I think we can all learn a whole lot from his understanding of the outdoors. So if you like this type of content, it would mean a lot to me if you liked, commented, and subscribed wherever you're listening or watching to it from, as it really does help out our channel. And until next time, safe travels.